The great hall of the Galactic Council had never felt so cold. Admiral Jack Morrison stood at the center podium, his hands gripping the metal edges as he watched his allies turn their backs on humanity one by one. The massive chamber could hold thousands of beings from across the galaxy, but today it felt empty despite being full of alien representatives. The Kalari ambassador was the first to speak. Her blue skin seemed to glow dimmer than usual as she announced her people's decision. The Kalari Federation regrets to inform this council that we can no longer support humanity in this conflict, she said, her voice echoing through the chamber. Jack had fought beside Kalari warriors for 15 years. They had shared victories and losses together. Now she would not even look at him. The crystalline Nexari were next. Their leader's voice came through a translation device, cold and mechanical. The Nexari Collective withdraws all military support effective immediately, it announced. The tall crystal beings began to dim their natural light, a sign of their departure. Jack remembered when these same beings had begged for human help. When pirates attacked their mining worlds. Humans had died protecting Nexari children, one by one. Every species that had once called humanity their friend stood up to announce their withdrawal. The reptilian Vorth, the winged ethers, the aquatic depths, all of them cited the same reason. The hegemony was too powerful. The war was already lost. They needed to think of their own people first, Lieutenant Commander Lisa Brooks watched from the observation deck above. She had served on 3 different alien ships during joint operations. These beings had been her friends, her brothers and sisters in arms. Now they were running away like scared children. Her hands shook with anger as she counted the ships already leaving the Sol system through the massive viewing ports. Hundreds of vessels that had formed the backbone of their defensive fleet were now nothing but bright dots, disappearing into hyperspace. The last to speak was Admiral Keth of the Tauran Empire. The Taurans had been humanity's closest allies, their technology helping humans reach the stars in the first place. Keth was an old warrior with scars covering his 4 arms. He had fought in more battles than most species had seen in their entire history. The Tauran Empire, Keth began, his voice heavy with what almost sounded like shame, cannot commit our fleets to a battle we cannot win. The hegemony has conquered half the galaxy. They have weapons that can destroy entire star systems. We have families to protect? He paused, finally looking directly at Jack. I am sorry, old friend. I am truly sorry. Jack Morrison had been a soldier for 30 years. He had seen friends die and worlds burn. He had made the hard choices that kept humanity alive in a galaxy that often saw them as weak newcomers. But standing in that chamber, watching every ally abandon them, he felt something he had never experienced before: complete isolation. The chamber began to empty as the alien delegates filed out. Soon only humans remained, along with a few automated recording devices. The silence was deafening. Captain Ryan Hayes, who commanded the defense fleet around Earth, stepped forward. His face was pale, but his voice was steady. Admiral, we just received the final communication from Hegemony Command, Ryan said, holding up a datapad. We have 72 hours to surrender unconditionally, or they will begin systematic bombardment of all human worlds and colonies. Jack took the device and read the message. The terms were simple and brutal. Complete surrender of all human military assets. Dissolution of human government. Relocation of the entire species to designated worlds under hegemony control. Essentially the end of human independence forever. How many ships do we have left? Jack asked. Counting everything from battleships to patrol boats, maybe 300 vessels, Ryan answered. The hegemony is bringing over 2,000 ships, not counting their support fleets. Lisa Brooks had made her way down from the observation deck. She was one of the youngest officers in the fleet, but her tactical mind was sharp. Sir, the other species are right about one thing, she said. We cannot win a conventional battle. Against those numbers. Jack looked around the empty chamber. The seats where their allies had sat just minutes before seemed to mock them. Holographic displays still showed the massive hegemony fleet moving toward human space like a dark tide. Every projection, every calculation, every strategic analysis. came to the same conclusion: humanity was about to be wiped out. You know what I find interesting? Jack said, his voice calm despite the circumstances. Every species that just ran away fought the hegemony at some point. The Kaleri held out for 3 months before surrendering. The Nexari lasted 6 weeks. The Taurans managed almost a year. Sir? Lisa asked, not understanding where he was going with this. They all fought conventional wars, Jack continued. They followed the established rules of galactic warfare. They used accepted tactics and respected the traditional boundaries of conflict. He turned to face his remaining officers. But humans have never been very good at following rules, have we? Captain Ryan Hayes started to smile. He was beginning to understand. No, sir, we have not. Jack activated the communication system that connected him to every human ship, station, and colony in the system. His voice carried across space to reach every human military officer and civilian leader still fighting. People of Earth and her colonies, he began. Our allies have abandoned us. The galaxy expects us to surrender quietly and accept our fate. They believe we will break under pressure like every other species before us. He paused, looking out at the stars where he knew human ships waited for orders. They have forgotten something important about humanity: we do not break. We do not surrender. And when someone threatens our families, our children, our way of life, we do not go quietly into that dark night. His voice grew stronger with each word. They want a war? We will give them a war unlike anything this galaxy has ever seen. In the communication center, technicians began receiving responses from across human space. Colony governors, ship captains, and military commanders all sent the same message: they would stand and fight. Not one human leader suggested surrender. The hegemony fleet continued its approach, confident in their overwhelming numbers and superior technology. They had crushed every resistance before, and they expected humanity to fall just as easily. They had no idea what was coming. They had never faced a species that turned desperation into innovation, fear into fury, and isolation into strength. Jack Morrison looked out at the stars one last time as a member of an alliance. Tomorrow, humanity would stand alone against the galaxy's most powerful empire. But they would stand. The first hegemony ships dropped out of hyperspace expecting to find broken human defenses and ships fleeing in panic. Instead, they found something that made their commanders pause in confusion. The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter was moving in ways that defied physics, and the mining stations that should have been abandoned were very much active. Major Kate Sullivan crouched inside what used to be Mining Station Alpha 7, watching the enemy fleet through jury-rigged sensors. Around her, former miners and engineers worked frantically to prepare their surprise. They had spent the last 72 hours turning every piece of mining equipment into weapons that no military manual had ever described. Kate, the mass drivers, are ready? Called out Tony Chun, a mining foreman who now commanded a weapon that could hurl asteroids at enemy ships. They had taken the equipment designed to move rocks for ore processing and modified it into something far more dangerous. We have 12 rocks loaded and ready to launch. Wait for my signal, Kate replied, watching as the hegemony scout ships moved closer. They were scanning the belt, probably wondering why humans would defend empty mining stations. They had no idea that those stations were now mobile fortresses disguised as abandoned facilities. The enemy ships moved in perfect formation, following standard military protocols. Their commanders expected frightened humans hiding behind makeshift barriers. What they got instead was a barrage of metal asteroids moving at incredible speed, launched from hidden positions throughout the belt. The first enemy ship never saw the rock that punched through its hull like it was made of paper on Mars. Colonel Ben Carter watched the red sky fill with descending enemy troop transports. The planet's surface looked empty and defenseless, exactly as he wanted it to appear. Beneath the rust-colored dirt, human defenders waited in tunnels and bunkers that connected every major settlement on the planet. Remember, let them land first, Ben told his troops through the underground communication system. Let them think they have won. The hegemony forces were used to quick victories where enemy troops surrendered after the first show of superior firepower. They had never faced an enemy that pretended to lose just to get them closer. The alien soldiers poured out of their transports, expecting to occupy empty human cities. Instead, they found themselves walking into carefully prepared kill zones. The ground beneath their feet exploded upward as hidden charges detonated. Buildings that looked abandoned suddenly came alive with weapons. Fire from concealed positions. Ben watched through his scope as enemy troops tried to take cover behind what they thought were solid walls. Those walls were made of specially designed materials that looked strong but fell apart when humans needed clear shots. The hegemony soldiers found themselves exposed in the middle of what should have been safe positions in Earth orbit. Commander Amy Foster coordinated the defense platforms that surrounded humanity's homeworld. Each platform was a massive structure, bristling with weapons, but they were still outnumbered 10-1 by the approaching enemy fleet. Amy knew they could not win a straight fight, so she had no intention of fighting one. "All platforms, prepare for Cascade Protocol," she announced. The other commanders knew what this meant. They would sacrifice some platforms to destroy many enemy ships, using tactics that no sane military leader would consider. Amy had volunteered her own platform to go first. When the enemy fleet moved within range, Amy gave the order that changed everything. "Platform 7, initiate core breach in 3 seconds, she said calmly. Her crew had already evacuated to escape pods, but Amy stayed at her post to guide the massive explosion that followed. The fusion core of Platform 7 did not simply explode. Amy had her engineers modify it to create a chain reaction that spread through space like a deadly wave. The explosion caught 12 enemy ships in its blast, but more importantly, it created a debris field that moved like a weapon itself. Metal fragments traveling at enormous speed turned 3 more enemy vessels into floating scrap. The hegemony commanders had never seen anything like this. In their experience, defenders tried to preserve their weapons and facilities for as long as possible. Humans seemed willing to destroy their own equipment if it meant taking enemies with them. Dr. Paul Martinez worked in his laboratory deep beneath the surface of Earth while the battle raged above his head. His team had been developing experimental weapons for years, but they had always been considered too dangerous for actual use. Now, with extinction facing humanity, those safety concerns seemed less important. "Doctor, the quantum destabilizer is ready for field testing," announced his assistant, Maria Santos. She held a device that looked innocent enough but contained technology that could tear holes in reality itself. "Are you sure we should deploy it without more testing?" Paul looked at the battle reports flowing into his lab. Human forces were fighting bravely, but they were still vastly outnumbered. "Maria, if we do not use every weapon we have, there will be nobody left to worry about safety protocols." The first quantum destabilizer was loaded onto a missile and fired at the largest enemy battleship. When it hit, the ship did not explode in any normal sense. Instead, it simply ceased to exist in several dimensions while remaining visible in others. The crew found themselves unable to interact with their own ship while being perfectly aware of their situation. The psychological effect on other hegemony forces was immediate. They had weapons that could destroy planets, but they had never seen anything that could make reality itself uncertain. Their communications filled with panicked reports about ships that were there but not there, weapons that worked backward through time, and humans who seemed to ignore the basic laws of physics. Warlord Cruex, commanding the hegemony fleet, stared at his tactical displays in growing confusion. His forces should have achieved complete victory within hours. Instead, they were being picked apart by an enemy that fought like no species he had ever encountered. Humans used their own equipment as weapons, turned their weaknesses into strengths, and seemed willing to sacrifice anything to inflict damage on their enemies. "Sir, we are receiving surrender requests," reported his communication officer. "Finally," Cruex said, expecting human leaders to see reason. "No, sir, the requests are coming from our own ships. They want to withdraw from combat zones where human defenders are using impossible weapons." Cruex realized that humanity was not going to be the easy conquest his superiors had promised. These creatures fought with a desperation and creativity that made them far more dangerous than their primitive technology suggested. For the first time in his military career, he began to wonder if the hegemony had made a terrible mistake. 2 weeks into the siege of Earth, humanity began to reveal the true depths of what desperation could create. Captain Lovera Green stood on the bridge of the experimental ship Phoenix, watching her crew make final preparations for the first test of technology that should not have existed. The ghost drive hummed beneath the deck plates, a device that her engineers had built from theories that most scientists said were impossible. "Captain, the ghost drive is ready for activation," reported her chief engineer, Mike Rodriguez. "I have to warn you again that we have no idea what will happen to us when we phase out of normal space." Lavra looked at the hegemony battleship on her main screen. It was 3 times the size of her vessel and armed with enough firepower to destroy a small moon. "Mike, staying in normal space means certain death. At least this way we have a chance to hurt them before we die." She gave the order and felt the universe change around her. The Phoenix did not disappear completely, but it became something between real and unreal. Enemy sensors could not lock onto them. Weapons passed through their hull without causing damage, but they could still fire their own guns at targets in normal space. Lavra had turned her ship into a ghost that could still bite. The first attack on the hegemony battleship came from nowhere. The enemy crew watched their shields absorb impacts from weapons that their sensors insisted were not there. Their return fire struck nothing but empty space, even though their eyes could see the human ship right in front of them. Within minutes, the massive battleship was crippled by an enemy that existed in 2 different versions of reality. Warlord Cruex watched this impossible battle from his command ship and felt something he had not experienced in decades of conquest. Fear was creeping into his thoughts as he realized that humanity was not following any known rules of warfare. They were rewriting the basic laws of how battles were fought. "How are they doing this?" he demanded from his science officer. "Sir, our instruments detect quantum fluctuations that suggest they are partially removing their ships from our dimensional framework while maintaining weapons capability," came the confused reply. "This should be impossible according to all known physics." "Then explain how they are shooting at us while being unhittable," Cruex snarled. Lieutenant Jake Miller floated in the darkness of space, wearing nothing but an engineering suit and magnetic clamps. His team of 12 humans was about to attempt something that made the ghost drive look reasonable. They were going to break into a hegemony command ship using tools designed for fixing broken pipes. "Remember, once we attach to their hull, we have maybe 10 minutes before their security systems detect us," Jake whispered into his communication device. "Get to the main computer core and upload the virus. If this works, we will own their entire fleet network." The virus they carried was not just a normal computer program. Human hackers had created something that learned and adapted faster than any artificial intelligence the galaxy had ever seen. It did not just break enemy systems. It improved itself while spreading through their networks like a digital plague. Jake's team reached the enemy ship and used simple cutting tools to burn through the hull. The hegemony crew never expected anyone to be crazy enough to attack a spaceship with hand tools. Security systems designed to detect sophisticated weapons ignored humans with welding torches and magnetic boots. Once inside, they made their way through corridors filled with alien technology toward the computer core. When they finally reached their target, Jake smiled as he plugged in the device that would change everything. The virus began its work immediately, not just disrupting communications, but learning how hegemony technology worked and turning it against them. On Earth, the war had reached every street and building. Ellen Rodriguez had been a school teacher before the invasion, but now she coordinated resistance cells that turned ordinary civilians into fighters, who made the enemy afraid to leave their ships. Her people did not wear uniforms or follow military rules. They were grandparents and teenagers, shopkeepers and office workers, all united by one simple goal. "The enemy soldiers are moving through downtown," reported Carlos Martinez, a former bus driver who now led a group of fighters armed with kitchen knives and hunting rifles. They think they control the area because they destroyed our police station. Ellen smiled grimly. Show them what control really means. Within minutes, the Hegemony Patrol found themselves under attack from every direction. Windows exploded outward as civilians fired improvised weapons. Sewer covers flew open to reveal fighters who disappeared again before return fire could find them. Even children threw homemade explosives from rooftops before vanishing into buildings that seemed empty but were full of hidden passages. The enemy soldiers had been trained to fight other soldiers, not an entire population that refused to accept defeat. Every human civilian was a potential threat. Every building could hide weapons. Every street corner might be a trap. The psychological pressure began to break down their discipline, and morale. Dr. Paul Martinez made a breakthrough that would haunt the galaxy for generations. His team had successfully weaponized probability itself, creating devices that did not just destroy targets, but made it so those targets had never existed in the first place. The first test made an entire enemy cruiser disappear from reality, along with all records that it had ever been built. Doctor, the temporal readings are off the charts, warned his assistant Maria Santos. We are not just destroying ships, we are erasing them from history itself. Paul watched as enemy formations suddenly found themselves missing vessels that their own computers insisted had never existed. Maria, if we can make their ships never exist, we can make their entire invasion never happen. The hegemony forces began to experience something beyond fear. Their crews started to doubt their own memories as ships they remembered fighting alongside simply vanished from all records. Communications became impossible when half the fleet could not prove to the other half that they were supposed to be there. Captain Danny Thompson piloted the first ship equipped with causality torpedoes, weapons that could strike targets before they were fired. The enemy fleet watched in terror as their own ships exploded seconds before human weapons fired at them. They were losing a battle that had not started yet to an enemy that was attacking them yesterday, the former allies who had abandoned. Humanity began to receive intelligence reports that made no sense. The Calari ambassador read descriptions of impossible human victories with growing horror. Weapons that violated causality, ships that existed in multiple dimensions, and civilians who fought like demons were destroying the most powerful military force in galactic history. Humanity was not just surviving the war, they were becoming something that made the concept of conventional warfare obsolete. 3 months after the hegemony invasion began, Dr. Paul Martinez achieved something that would change the nature of reality itself. Standing in his underground laboratory, he watched as his team completed the final calibrations on a weapon that should not have been possible to build. The quantum uncertainty device did not just destroy targets, it made the universe forget they had ever existed in the first place. Doctor, are you absolutely certain we should test this? Asked Maria Santos, her hands shaking as she prepared to activate the device. The computer model suggests this could affect reality on a galactic scale. Paul looked at the reports flowing in from across human space. Despite their impossible victories, humanity was still losing ships and people every day. The hegemony had billions of soldiers and thousands of worlds to draw from. Earth had only what they could build and the will to never surrender. Maria, conventional weapons will not win this war, he said quietly. If we are going to survive, we need to become something that makes survival irrelevant. The first test target was a hegemony dreadnought that had been bombarding human colonies for weeks. When Paul activated the quantum uncertainty device, something happened that broke the basic rules of how the universe worked. The enemy ship did not explode or disappear. It became uncertain whether it had ever existed at all. The crew of the dreadnought found themselves in a state between being and not being. They could see their ship and each other, but their instruments insisted they were not real. Their weapons would not fire because the targeting computers could not confirm the weapons existed. Their communications failed because the network could not locate their ship to connect them. More terrifying was the effect on the rest of the hegemony fleet. Half of their ships suddenly had no records of the dreadnought ever being built, while the other half remembered it clearly. The confusion spread through their entire command structure as officers tried to give orders about ships that some computers said were real and others said were impossible. Admiral Jack Morrison watched the test results from his command center and realized that humanity had crossed a line that no species had ever approached. They were not just winning battles anymore, they were rewriting the fundamental nature of what battles could be. "Admiral, we are receiving communications from our former allies," reported Lieutenant Commander Lisa Brooks. "The Calari Federation is asking for an emergency meeting." "Tell them we are busy," Jack replied. "They had their chance to stand with us." The Calari ambassador arrived at the edge of the Sol system in a single diplomatic ship, flying a flag of truce that seemed almost insulting after their abandonment of humanity. Ambassador Velthan had fought alongside human forces for years, before her people chose safety over honor. Now she faced Admiral Morrison across a communication screen with something that looked very much like fear in her eyes. "Jack, what have you become?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Our sensors are detecting weapon signatures that should not be possible. Your ships are fighting in 17 different dimensions simultaneously. You are using causality itself as a weapon." "We became what we needed to become," Jack answered. "When the galaxy abandoned us, we had two choices: die quietly or evolve beyond what anyone thought possible. This is not evolution, this is madness," Velthan protested. "You are breaking the basic laws of physics. You are threatening the stability of reality itself." Jack leaned forward, his face hard as stone. "The hegemony threatened to wipe out every human in the galaxy. You and your people decided that was acceptable as long as it did not happen to you. Now you are worried about the stability of reality?" Captain Steve Rogers commanded the newest human warship, a vessel that existed in multiple dimensions at the same time while somehow remaining a single ship. The USS Paradox moved through space in ways that hurt the minds of anyone trying to track it. Enemy sensors showed it in dozens of locations simultaneously, while their weapons could never hit the same target twice. "Captain, we are ready to engage." "The Hegemony Command Fleet," reported his tactical officer, Janet Kim. "All 17-dimensional projections are synchronized and armed." Steve looked at his crew, all of them human volunteers who had accepted the risks of serving on a ship that challenged the basic nature of existence. "Remember, we are not just fighting for Earth anymore. We are fighting to prove that when humans are pushed too far, the universe itself bends to our will." The battle that followed made no sense to outside observers. The Paradox attacked enemy ships from the past, present, and future simultaneously. Its weapons fired backwards through time to destroy targets before they knew they were under attack. Enemy return fire passed through empty space where the ship had been. Would be, and might have been, Warlord Cruex watched his command fleet being systematically destroyed by an enemy that violated every known law of warfare. His ships were being killed by weapons that had not been invented yet, fired from ships that existed in yesterday and tomorrow, but not today. "Sir, I recommend immediate withdrawal," urged his tactical officer. "We cannot fight an enemy that attacks us from multiple timelines. Withdrawal to where?" Cruex demanded. "They have weapons that can erase us from history itself. There is nowhere in the galaxy that would be safe from what humanity has become." On Earth, General Hannah Scott deployed the latest generation of human ground forces. Her soldiers wore armor that phased between dimensions, carried weapons that fired concentrated probability, and could move through time like it was just another direction in space. They were no longer quite human in any traditional sense, but they were still fighting for humanity's survival. The hegemony ground forces that had occupied human cities found themselves facing an enemy that redefined what warfare meant. Human soldiers appeared from nowhere, struck with impossible weapons, and vanished before return fire could reach them. They attacked from the past to change the present, and fought battles in alternate timelines where the enemy had already lost. Dr. Martinez received reports from across human space about the success of their reality-altering weapons. Entire hegemony fleets were being erased from existence, not just destroyed, but made to have never existed in the first place. The psychological effect on the remaining enemy forces was devastating. "Doctor, we are receiving surrender requests." "From hegemony commanders?" Maria Santos reported, her voice filled with disbelief. "They are not just asking to withdraw, they are begging us to stop using weapons that unmake reality." Paul looked at the galaxy-wide tactical display showing human forces that existed in multiple dimensions, fought with weapons that violated causality and had turned the impossible into routine. "Maria, I think it is time we reminded the galaxy why they should never abandon their allies." The tide had not just turned. It had become something that flowed backward through time and sideways through dimensions that had no names. 6 months after the galaxy had written humanity's death sentence, the impossible happened. The mighty hegemony empire, conqueror of 1,000 worlds and destroyer of entire species, sent a message of surrender to Admiral Jack Morrison. The transmission came through channels that existed in 17 different dimensions simultaneously, ensuring that humanity would receive it no matter which version of reality they were currently occupying. Warlord Cruex appeared on the communication screen looking like a broken warrior. His proud military bearing had been replaced by something that resembled shell shock. Behind him, the bridge of his command ship showed signs of damage that should not have been possible, with some sections existing in different time periods than others. "Admiral Morrison," Cruex began, his voice barely steady, "the hegemony empire formally requests terms of surrender. We cannot continue to fight an enemy that has weaponized the fundamental forces of existence itself." Jack studied the alien commander who had once seemed so confident in his overwhelming superiority. "Warlord, when this war began, you gave humanity 72 hours to surrender unconditionally. You threatened to wipe out our entire species if we refused to accept slavery." "That was before we understood what humanity truly was," Cruex replied. "We have lost more ships to your impossible weapons than we have in all our previous conquests combined. Our crews are refusing orders because they cannot fight an enemy that attacks them from yesterday while existing in tomorrow." Captain Steve Rogers stood beside his admiral, his uniform bearing the insignia of the Human Temporal Fleet, a military branch that had not existed 6 months earlier. His ship, the USS Paradox, currently existed in 43 different dimensional states while maintaining normal space communication through technology that hurt to think about. "The terms are simple," Steve said. "Complete withdrawal from all human space, return of all prisoners taken during the invasion, and a formal treaty guaranteeing that no species in this galaxy will ever again face extinction alone." Cruex looked confused. "You want to protect other species after what they did to you?" Jack smiled grimly. "Warlord, you seem to misunderstand the lesson we are teaching. We are not interested in revenge against those who abandoned us. We are interested in making sure that what happened to humanity never happens to anyone else." The peace negotiations took place on a space station that existed in normal space-time, one of the few locations where representatives from different realities could meet safely. The hegemony delegation arrived expecting typical conquest terms, demands for territory and resources. Instead, they found humanity offering something that no victor in galactic history had ever proposed. Ambassador Jenny Clark, representing the new Human Federation, laid out terms that redefined what victory meant. "The hegemony will withdraw to their original borders and will never again wage wars of conquest. In return, humanity will share our dimensional defense technology with any species that faces extinction." "You want to arm other species with reality-altering weapons?" asked the lead hegemony negotiator. "That seems unwise for the victors of this conflict," Jenny smiled. "We are not interested in ruling the galaxy through fear. We are interested in making sure that the strong can never again prey on the weak simply because the weak stand alone." Dr. Paul Martinez, now wearing the insignia of the Human Reality Research Division, continued his work on technologies that made the impossible routine. His latest project involved weapons that could show potential aggressors the inevitable consequences of their actions by making them experience all possible futures of a conflict simultaneously. Doctor, the predictive causality device is ready for demonstration, announced Maria Santos, who now led her own team of scientists working on technology that would have been called magic a year ago. We can show the hegemony leadership what would happen if they ever broke this treaty. Paul activated the device and watched as the hegemony delegates experienced every possible future where they attempted to restart their conquest. In each timeline, they saw their empire destroyed not just by humanity, but by the species they had once oppressed who now possessed human-designed weapons that turned physics into a weapon. As you can see, Paul said calmly while the alien diplomats recovered from experiencing their own destruction across multiple realities, breaking this treaty would result in consequences that extend beyond simple military defeat. The former allies who had abandoned Earth found themselves facing a new galactic order that they had not expected. The Calari Federation received an invitation to join the Human Protection Accord, a treaty that offered them advanced defensive technology in exchange for a promise to never again abandon allies facing extinction. Ambassador Velthan met with Jenny Clark in a conference room aboard a human ship that existed partially outside normal time. Jenny, we understand that you have every right to refuse us membership in your new alliance. We abandoned you when you needed us most. Velthan, we are not interested in holding grudges, Jenny replied. We are interested in building a galaxy where species support each other instead of running away when things become difficult. But the weapons you have developed, the technology that breaks reality itself, surely you understand how terrifying this is for other species. Jenny nodded. Of course we understand. That is why we are offering to teach defensive versions of this technology to our allies. You will never again need to choose between abandoning friends and facing extinction. General Hannah Scott commanded ground forces that had evolved beyond traditional concepts of soldiers. Her troops could move through time like other armies, moved through terrain, existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and carried weapons that fired concentrated impossibility at their targets. General, we have confirmed that all hegemony occupation forces have withdrawn from human worlds, reported Colonel Tim Adams, whose regiment currently existed in the past, present, and future simultaneously to ensure complete coverage of the timeline. Good, Hannah replied. Begin deployment of temporal defense networks around former hegemony target worlds. Any species that calls for aid will receive protection from forces that can respond before the attack begins. The galaxy discovered that humanity had not just survived their abandonment, they had transformed it into the foundation for a new kind of civilization. The Human Protection Doctrine became the basis for galactic law, stating that any species facing extinction could call upon humanity for aid and receive weapons that made extinction impossible. Captain Danny Thompson, now commanding the first ship designed to exist in all possible realities simultaneously, received reports from across the galaxy. Former enemies were requesting human assistance in defending against pirates. Former allies were asking to join defense pacts that guaranteed they would never stand alone again. Captain, we are receiving a transmission from the Tauran Empire, reported his communications officer. Admiral Keth is requesting permission to visit Earth. Danny smiled. Tell the Admiral that Earth welcomes visitors who come in peace. But also inform him that our definition of peace now includes weapons that can enforce it across multiple timelines. The age of human dominance had begun, but it was not built on conquest or fear. Instead, it was founded on a simple promise that the galaxy had never heard before. No species would ever again face extinction alone, because humanity had turned the abandonment of their allies into the catalyst for becoming something that made abandonment impossible. The galaxy learned that when you betray your friends in their darkest hour, you do not just lose their trust. You create something far more dangerous than any enemy. You create protectors who have transcended the very concept of defeat and turned impossibility into their greatest weapon.